Hello, everyone. Welcome to Disco's AI Upskilling podcast. I'm your host, Candice Faktor, co-CEO and co-founder of Disco, the #1 AI-powered social learning platform. I am so excited to be here with you on this journey. I created this podcast to explore how AI is transforming the way we work and learn. Our goal is to bring together thought leaders, innovators, practitioners from all backgrounds to discuss how the world of work and learning is changing at lightning speed. It is my absolute pleasure to have Benoit Hardy-Vallée. Hopefully I pronounced that right, and you can correct me in a second if I
Perfect.
didn't.
Oui.
With us today, Benoit is fantastic. He is a thought leader on workforce transformation and learning, and he is actually the director of workforce transformation and learning at Deloitte. He specializes in future-proofing workforces by transforming their learning ecosystems. Welcome, Benoit. It is wonderful to have you on our podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Right back.
Benoit, tell us a little bit about your background and your role at Deloitte. You have a fascinating history of working at the intersection of technology, change management, learning, workforce development. Tell the audience a bit more about your background.
Sure, and I'll keep it short, but I guess I've always liked to be a bit of a misfit or a bit of somebody who plays and sit between two chairs. So I started in life studying philosophy because I found it fascinating, but I quickly veered into cognitive science. So I did a BA, MA, PhD, all that good stuff. I was interested by how the brain works and economic decision making. And then I started to have really deep thoughts about unemployment, which means I needed to find a real job. So on the dark night in February, when I was young, I Googled what can I do with a PhD in philosophy. So all that to say that I ended up in consulting. I discovered this area, and then quickly, because I was both interested by the human mind and the human brain, and also by technology. And it's interesting because when I was a student, we were talking about AI more from a theoretical point of view. Philosopher, cognitive scientist, computer scientist. I was in this interdisciplinary group and community where we were talking about what kind of algorithms implement intelligence, what kind of structures are required, what is memory, and all that. And now, especially with the new wave of Gen AI, it's becoming a reality. We're seeing it in front of us. Not fully AI, but at least cognitive systems. And I'm happy to discuss about the difference between these terminologies. And then I've always worked at the intersection of your HR transformation, the employee experience change management, but also technology itself. I've always liked how one influenced the other, and we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years how HR has been digitized, reinvented, transformed, how the way we work has been transformed. So I had a chance to work across industry on these topics and so many questions.
Well, I could hear the passion for what you do oozing out of you. So I love that. And I think we're at a very interesting moment. A lot of people are thinking about this as the fourth industrial revolution, right? This is a huge moment in terms of how we are changing the way we work and learn. And what is your thinking around what's going to change the most next year, specifically when you think about the future of workplace learning?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of changes, it will take time. We're starting to see now example of Gen AI being used in learning. If you look at the latest iteration of the Google Notebooks, Avatar, and all that, it is now possible with a couple of prompts to generate very realistic, engaging videos that can be created in multiple languages in a very short amount of time. The market, I think, is highly fragmented because you have so many companies claiming to be doing that and being the world leader in that. I don't know how fast that will consolidate. I think it's going to be tricky for organizations to choose which one. I think I see next year as still people experimenting. But we know the capability is there. It's not a question of how it's going to work, if it's going to work. It's working. It's happening. You can do that. But how do you procure it? How do you deploy it? And yes, there's a whole kind of ethical questions around it. But I think when you're not reading the press, but talk with client, you
Yes.
realize that, yes, people are aware of that. But 99% of the time, people just go about their business without fearing that data will be leaked or that your corporate secret will be leaked in a training session. Think of all the function and no disrespect to HR, but we're probably the one that has the least chance of creating a major ethical issues with regard to AI.
That's really interesting and an interesting, astute comment, right? So, what I'm hearing you say is it's not a matter of if, it's truly a matter of when. And you can see how generative AI is going to be involved in learning. And it sounds like, from an ethical perspective, it's the least worrisome area about the data privacy leaking when it comes to HR using these tools. But the procurement is where it gets tricky, and who you choose to work with is tricky. So let's like dive in even deeper, right? Which is when you think about upskilling, first of all, upskilling is an interesting term. What does upskilling mean to you? And my second question is, how is the upskilling delivery going to change using AI? You hinted at it with the video, and obviously we are an upskilling AI-powered platform, so happy to
Yes.
share
Yep.
our thoughts as well, but love to hear what you're thinking. What is upskilling, and how does upskilling delivery change with the use of AI?
Absolutely. So when we talk about upskilling, I guess one of the type of learning or one of the way we can think about learning, because not every learning is upskilling. You have compliance learning, right? Or procedure you
Sure.
have to follow. Upskilling, the way I use it, is in a situation where something is changing inside or outside. And as a reaction to that, or better, proactively, you bring the level of skill in a certain group, in a certain family, in a certain department to get ready. So if you're in finance and you know that next year you're going to get an ERP, and suddenly you're not just crunching model in Excel, but you have to be a finance business partner. You have to be a storyteller that's using data to convince budget owner that this is going to be how we're going to use your money next year. It's a whole different new set of skill. Implicitly, there's also this idea of elevating. We're also elevating the human through the role. If you look at what happened with recruitment in the last few years, companies that are using AI systems for recruiting, and this is not science fiction, it's been there for 5 years. It exists. For those who already bought them, their recruiters were spending more time with hiring managers and with candidates. So we are scaling up, but we are also elevating the role of the people mastering the skill.
That's great. Amazing explanation. And how do you think how's the delivery of upskill? First of all, what do you find most effective in upskilling delivery today? And how is this going to change with AI?
For many years, what has been extremely effective in learning is using all the accomplishments from marketing, from user experience design, working with persona, working with journey map to personalize the learning, and also to find what's the minimal effective dose. Because let's be frank, most people want to do their work. They don't want to take a break from work, learn something, and then come back. Or if you do that, make it a real fun with candy or happy hour, anything, right? Like, you have to give people an incentive or a reason to learn outside the flow of work. A lot of people like to work in the flow of work. It's less time consuming and it's also ongoing. It could be through online platform, through coaching, through interaction. So what's effective? Personalized, minimalist in the sense of finding really what's going to create the trigger. I would say also adaptive, because in some cases, you don't need to learn everything. You just need to validate your skills. So you see platform with adaptive learning where you take a test, a quiz. If you know all the topic, then fine. You just learn where you have gap so that it's not only micro learning, but very precise learning. And I think this is what AI and all this technology is providing to learning. It's the ability to have a more precise approach. It's like we have precision drilling and precision agriculture and precision medicine, the kind of drug that I would need for a specific problem I might have as a 40-something-year-old male maybe will be different if you are from another background, another age, another gender, and all that. So medicine is evolving this way. Learning should have that same approach rather than the traditional archetype of the flight agent in the takeoff, where they are reading the instruction for safety and nobody listen because it's just a broad discourse for everybody. It's like you've heard that many times, so nobody's paying attention. So how you change, well, you personalize, you simplify. Again, there's nothing better than AI to do that, because if you have to manipulate data, and rather than all of us watching the same videos, but rather having each of us having our own version of that video, this is just data. It's a purely mathematical problem. What does Benoit versus Candice need, want, will learn, and consume? So that's, once you know my skills, my interests, and what I'm trying to accomplish, then you can break it down and have AI provide it to you.
I love that. That is absolutely aligned with the vision at Disco around, as we say, personalized and generative learning. And I think that is in many ways the biggest shift of this time period. Is before, I loved your analogy, which is the flight attendant, reading the same thing that nobody listens to. And in many ways, that's why we started Disco, is because I'd never taken an online learning course. And I said to myself, how is that humanly possible? I love learning, but it just never appealed to me to sit and consume what everybody else was consuming. So what I'm hearing you say is the more personalized, the more in the flow of work, bite size, and really making sure it's adapted to the way in which I want to learn and what I need to learn. And the less you take people out of their workflow or out of needing to do something beyond work, the better, is what it sounds like.
And I would say the closest to the action as possible. Because again, if you're in the airplane and you're about to crash, I bet you will listen to the flight attendant, right?
Such a good point.
Right? Because suddenly you're motivated, you're close to it, this is real, you have an incentive to pay attention. Same thing, if I'm about to do a big transaction, if I'm about to go into a big project, then maybe there are elements of the technology or the methodology that I need to learn. It's motivated learning. We learn when we have a clear reason why, and compliance is probably the least motivating reason. Now, there's a place for that, right? Don't get me wrong, but it's hard to motivate people in just being compliant. But if you're giving them tools for performance at the moment or just in time, then people will use this technology or this content. This is why the digital adoption platform like WalkMe, and there are multiple others, are great. It's because they're embedded in the work and they come up just when you need them.
Right. So it's just in time learning.
Yes, rather than just in case.
And just in case, right? And solving a problem, like being very specific to the problem you're solving.
Yes.
So I want to take this to a different place, which is AI tooling is coming out. There's tons of it. How do you personally approach AI adoption in your role at Deloitte? Tell me a bit more about how you're thinking about AI to do work at Deloitte, to elevate. How do you upskill using AI personally at Deloitte?
So I must say, I don't spend too much time watching videos about it. I play with it, right? Like many people, I need to try. I need to sometimes spend a little bit time, or maybe wasting some of the time, because I want to try things and see what work best. Now that being said, we have access to tons of information, but for me, it's about having that tool always on. There was some research in the past that was talking about two archetypes, the centaurs and the cyborgs, right? The centaurs will do a bit of work in one platform, then they will use Gen AI, and then after that, they continue in the platform or document that they have. The cyborg gets that ongoing flow between one and the other. And this is more how I work. I have an idea, put it in the tool, I get it proposed or written up, then I rethink it, I do something with it, I write more, I bring something maybe in a presentation, then send it back into the tool, so that at the end, it's not clear what's AI and what's human, because it's an ongoing interaction. So that's for document production, ideation. And there are simple things like interview. We used to have junior consultant whose sole reason to be on a call was taking notes for 1 hour and then process all that. Now we record the tool, we record the conversation, and we have tools that will give us what's the summary. We once ran a project with 50 interviews. We recorded every 50 of them and processed all the information, and we're able to extract patterns out of that. It's not to say that the junior consultant does not have a role, but now they have an interesting role where we're asking them to play with a tool. What's the best prompt to analyze the information? How would you present that? Because maybe a tool will give you a list of themes, but how do we want to present that to get even more insight? Or now that you find something, why don't you go back into the data and find something even more interesting? Triangular angle. So suddenly, this consultant is involved in problem solving rather than the administrative task, recording or taking notes. And I guess a third aspect would be around skilling, workforce strategy, precision learning, where we develop our own tool where we can look at different jobs and the tasks associated with it and find how these tasks will be impacted in the near future, so that we have not a crystal ball, it's not perfect, but a view as to where the effort should be allocated in terms of training, upskilling, learning, and even hiring for another.
Okay, lots to unpack there because that was an amazing answer. So the first thing I heard you say was the way you learn is by doing, right? It's the intersection between taking knowledge, applying that knowledge, taking the application and reflecting on what you're getting out of it. And I love the way you framed it. I'm going to dig deeper in a second around the relationship between humans and the AI versus the AI itself. Our thesis is it's about augmenting human potential versus just replacing it. And so I thought the example you use with a consultant is a perfect one, which is because somebody asked, and please feel free to ask questions, audience. I'm definitely going to get to them, but tangible ways. I think that was a great example of a tangible way you're using AI to do manual tasks, and then you're using a human to be reflective around the prompt engineering to deliver the output. So I thought that was an excellent insight. I want to double click on something, which is you mentioned you're looking at, from Deloitte's perspective, which roles and which skills are most likely to be affected by AI adoption. What should we know, right? For all the other leaders, CEOs, organizational talent that's here, what are some of the findings around the areas that are going to be impacted most when it comes to AI replacement and AI augmentation?
And the first thing to note is that we look at it not in terms of binary. Will this job be automated or not? It's never the case. It's never that simple. It's more about finding which task in a job is the most likely to be automated. And yeah, maybe if 90% of your tasks are automated, it's a different conversation, but it's okay in terms of task. And then if you can farm this out to technology, then have human growing new skills or investing into skills. I think, though, there's no real surprise. Most of the administrative, repetitive, clerical task can be, in theory, automated, right? Again, you still have to do the work of figuring out your own workflow, your own data. Not everybody is willing to do the work to get there, but once you get there, again, I take the example of recruitment because I've seen it, right? Reviewing a CV, planning an interview, scheduling it, moving candidate into the pipelines. These were tasks that were manual, that could consume 15 hours a week of a recruiter, at least entry-level recruiter.
Sure.
Nowadays, that person can be looking at a pool of talent and be thinking about what kind of campaign do I want to run?
Absolutely.
And how do I want to market to this talent? So anything that requires cut, paste, these little tasks that does not engage your creativity and collaboration, that's the first one.
100%. And if you were specific in the learning, so what do you see as the biggest tasks that you're replacing or are going to be replaced in the L&D world by AI?
the low-hanging fruit is content, right?
Yes.
It's the first place because yeah, whether it's marketing or other domain that already paved the way in automating some of that content. Research, although you have to be careful because if you get hallucination or confabulation, you want to make sure that you double check the source
Sure.
or the notes for every research. I think in learning, you can have content automated pretty quick. I think though, links to what we talked before, that the future of learning is probably less learning. It's more support. It's more on demand. And it's not so much about just automating content, because sometimes content is not the solution. People learn by having feedback on what they do. So the next generation, because right now there's still a very catchy element when you see video online of two avatars talking in a podcast. By the way, we're both real, right? We're not avatar. This
I was
is
just about to say
100%
that.
human. Just want to be clear, all right? But you can see now these mock-up of podcasts with avatar and put life, right? But again, does everybody, is it interesting for everyone? Is it the way we learn how to, manage a project, deal with a difficult conversation? So all these ways of learning are still based on that educational paradigm, this view that we learn by sitting and watching and hearing, but we learn by doing. So you're
Yes.
going to see increasingly AI tutor, a system that give you real life feedback. You're going to see more simulation because VR with GenAI is a fantastic tool for learning because it's simulated in the flow, right? Technically, it's out of the flow because you're still learning and not working, but it simulates your experience of working. Once we're beyond the craze of, hey, I can create content in 5 languages in 2 minutes, okay, the next phase is rethinking deeply what it means to learn. And really, I think learning is behavioral change, right? You learn something if and only if you do something. Right.
That's a very astute point, and I think even in Disco, we have our AI curriculum generator, which saves like so much time for people. Like, give us your training data, any kind of data, and we will literally generate the entire curriculum, from the lessons to the assessments to all the different quizzing, whatever elements would be in a traditional curriculum. But that's just a part of the learning process. To your point, it's much more about like, how do I get feedback? How do I have social layers on top of that learning that actually creates the behavioral change? And so I think what you're saying is we're going to see even more around that behavior change, that coaching, that tutoring, that simulation, the ability to assess whether or not you have or haven't learned, or what your blind spots are even in learning. So we're just at the very beginning. But I do think what you said is like table stakes today is anybody who's spending lots of manual hours and time on tasks can be easily replicated by AI. That's the low-hanging fruit. What would you say? You're talking to clients all the time. What are the biggest challenges that actually are limiting the adoption of these new technologies in companies? Is it budget? Is it readiness? Is it data? Is it other
So
focuses?
there are multiple, I think, through both our client conversation, but also some research that we published in the last year. A lot of companies just don't feel ready. Before you want to use productively AI, beyond using ChatGPT to rewrite your given world, fine. But the next step, bringing it into a workflow, customizing it to use your data to support your employee in their needs. You need people who think about data, who think about the job. Half, if I recall, about half of organizations in Canada say that they are not ready. And that's also why we have lots of questions, and I have colleagues who run AI academies because there's a need to educate at different levels. And again, from the boardroom down to the front line, it's going to be different experience. So getting ready is one. Correlated to that, it's the availability of talent. Again, we have a giant neighbor in the south with tons of fund, large companies. So it's easy to buy Canadian companies or to acquire our talent. We have smaller companies in Canada, and I would say probably more of a culture of risk aversion and consensus. So we're not necessarily always the first one to move. So we have sometimes a bit of a cultural resistance, or maybe an opportunity to take a bit more risk and try a few things. So you have that cultural element, which plays a part. But I think clearly it's if you don't have the talent, then you need to develop internally. But to develop it internally, again, you have to spend time and make it interesting for people. It goes back to our earlier points. If the solution is watch 5 hours of video and it's not going to work. But if you give them an opportunity to play with it, to practice, to have somebody who's coaching you, to have a hackathon, right? Something fun, then people will learn.
But it sounds like it's a talent and then like risk aversion meets, like not really knowing how to actually get the behavioral change beyond just the watching of videos. And Benoit, you are constantly talking to the leaders of Canada's top organizations. And I know we talked about this earlier. We have a huge productivity problem in Canada today. I don't need to go into too much detail, but I would say we're really lagging behind way more than we ever have been. What's your advice to companies to really use these technologies, use upskilling to really change this? What would you offer these companies?
To reinvest in our employees. And again, by that, I don't mean more videos, right? But reinvesting, I mean, if you look 30, 40 years ago, a lot of companies were famous for their corporate university and their campus. And maybe we don't need the same level of formality. But if we could create either the space, the time, or these experiences, or at least the mentality of having some kind of campus, right? Some kind of laboratory culture where people can have time to learn, people taking the chance to maybe hire people who don't have the skills but have the desire, the propension, the learning agility, and then giving them this opportunity to upskill themselves internally, maybe because that's not what they would get out of school. I think that would give us an opportunity to be a bit more willing to explore, to try new things with technology. It's also a macroeconomic question. There's immigration policy and labor law and corporate investment and all that. But if you give people the opportunity to learn in a way that's interesting, it will result in more innovation and productivity. Right now, it's still pretty, I would say, limited. If you look at a lot of data, you will see that compliance learning is still the first form of learning in many organizations. I heard of some companies that had to increase their bandwidth just to allow for more mandatory online training. And so we're far away from a mentality of how can you create your own Silicon Valley? How can you have your own lab? How can you have your own corporate university? So that we stand up something that takes not a 4 years degree, but can you do something in after a month? And even I look at my own industry in consulting, years ago, people would join consultancies. They would have a month of training or 2 weeks of training. You would go somewhere, you get out of there, you have the foundation, and it's not any training you could get in school, but now you were ready. And I think we're softly rediscovering that because after the 90s and 2000, I guess there was a big re-engineering desire, cutting costs. And it's true. Cutting learning, that's the first line item because you can take it out. And on the short term, you don't see the impact on people, yet you have an impact on the bottom line. So of course it's tempting, rip this off. But in the long run, and this is where I think we have some opportunity, can we bring back that long-term thinking, right?
Absolutely.
So that it's not just about the next quarter, but making sure that we develop people sustainably. And if everybody does that in the country, yes, people will change job. Yes, people will go. But if we all do that to our employees, if my employees go and your employees go and we trade them, then we're all getting people with the right skills.
fascinating. So what I'm hearing you say, and it's very relevant in many ways to what we do at Disco, because the style of learning that often happens on Disco is much deeper learning, right? There really are social learning programs, much more accelerators and incubators and boot camps and experiential learning, that what I'm hearing you say organizations need to ultimately embrace, whether it's in real life, like a campus that you're really trying to build, or even I would say these virtual spaces for people to do more than consumption-based learning. And I think the theme that you're really pushing is we need to invest in our people. We need to invest in the upskilling of people and giving them time to play, to incubate, to do hackathons, to do experiential learning, to have projects, versus just the bare minimum, that we're investing today for the long term. And we've been so short-term focused as a country that we're missing the importance of talent. We're not treating our talent like an asset. We're treating it much more as a means to an end. And so I
Or a
think that's
cost.
our cost, right? Like a true cost. And I think that's a great way to wrap this up here and move to some audience questions, because there's some really good ones. So Masim asked, how can AI help B2B salespeople, in your opinion? Are you seeing upskilling with AI for B2B salespeople, and what are you seeing?
So I would say it helps with your skills, but not necessarily the traditional training route, in the sense that a lot of the sales is essentially a digital exercise. You have data in your CRM, you have data about your offering. This is just a lot of data. So figuring out what's the need of the client, putting together a proposal whose content and pricing and structure will be compelling for the client. Again, it's a problem solving that AI can help a lot. So it's not that you have to be coached by an AI, it's that you can use AI to do the task faster and then get feedback so that the next time you do better at doing it. So I think B2B sales, it's another great area to deploy AI. And also because it's revenue generated, there's typically more willingness to involve in that, right? Because there's a clear impact if you can help your sales force to be more effective.
Amazing. And one last question that we covered a little bit, but in case you had some other great examples, like you spoke a lot about in the flow of work learning, right? And I think there's a role for both of these things of what you're saying.
Yeah,
It's very much an
absolutely.
and, right? Like deeper learning programs and then in the flow of work. Can you give some really great examples of just like how to actually achieve that in the flow of work learning? Like any other example that you would want to share with?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of these examples are actually not with technology, but with people. So let's say that you have maybe a traditional training, there's a day of a class with an expert on a topic, you do something interesting, great. Even if it's the best experience you ever had, it's still out of the flow because you're not learning. But what if in your next one-on-one with your manager, so it's still part of your job to update your manager, there's part of the conversation that's about the topic that you learn, or it's a way for you to practice a skill. You can have also the keys to use activities or channels of communications that already exist so that it doesn't feel like you're doing something on top of working. The best example for me are anything like gigs, short projects, small project assignment, when you do something that is stretching you a little bit, right? Great way to learn. So you're in marketing, you want to have a little bit of taste of what it's like to be in sales. So go help the sales force putting together some proposal. Technically, it's not your job, but you are still working when you do that. And then you get that coaching and then you get that feedback from your colleagues in sales. And I think that's always how we learn, right? One of my colleagues who for years have been using this line where it says you don't learn skiing by reading books about ski, right? You get on your
Totally.
ski, you try it, and maybe you have some coaching, maybe somebody is helping you, but you're not reading books or watching video about skiing. You try it, and this is how you get better. And I think this is something we have to bring back in the concept of learning. It's not just training. It's doing something and getting feedback So you need somebody who knows more or know how to coach you in this direction.
Yeah.
And to me, these are the best in the flow learning experience. Anytime I had a colleague walking me through something or explaining me how we do process X or Y, Z, I think these were the most interesting learning
Yeah.
experience.
I love that. And I think what you're talking about is feedback, right? In many ways, like being able to get that feedback, that coaching, that mentorship, that actual real world experience, and then get some advice. And to your point, I'm from South Africa. So I couldn't ski when I got here. And the only way I learned how to ski, and I was 15, which was old, was by falling down many times. So I love that. Let's wrap this up. I have one more question for you. And Benoit, we're going into 2025. What are 3 of your highest hopes for workforce transformation?
So I think for next year, it's seeing a bit more investment in learning, meaningful investment, because you see a lot of survey and analysts claiming, yes, we need to adapt to the changing world, but I found that it's still an area that clients are very wary and doing it very step by step. So I hope we can take a bit more of an enterprise approach. I hope to see also a bit more clarity emerging from the visionary marketplace, some consolidation, or maybe some systems being part of broader platform, because you don't want to be dealing with 55 different type of vendors. And I hope that now with the consumer Gen AI platform also, it's going to be easier for people to upskill themselves. Because now that you have multimodal learning, just to give an example, I know nothing about gardening. I don't know what's good or bad. But last summer, I just sent picture to ChatGPT about what was growing in my backyard. And I said, which one are the good ones? Which one are the bad ones? Look at even Toronto that summer, whatever, tell me. And it told me exactly which one to keep and which one to remove. So now I learned by doing, by having this little assistant who was helping me with this area of my life is pretty much still underdeveloped there.
I love your answer, because I think so much of what we do in the world of work, in the world of learning, is really creating the environment for people and our companies to grow. And so what a
Yeah.
great way to end the note on gardening. And I'm very excited to see more people using these tools to really help themselves grow and to help our companies grow. So Benoit, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and have a wonderful rest of your day.